S.
F.
J.
I still think him wanting to put his head on another person's body was a real Wallaroo wish.
What?
You know, a Wallaroo wish.
Hello, and welcome to Beardo's True Stories from Australian History. This story begins in 1963, when Australia's car industry, just like today, was totally dominated by foreign-owned companies. There were then, as there are now, no Australian-owned car manufacturers. The few cars that were being built in Australia at the time by Holden and Ford, neither of which were locally owned, were also being designed by foreign engineers and constructed with parts made elsewhere. In June 1963, a nationalist and fervent patriot was elected to the position of Australian Prime Minister. Jonathan Blatter firmly believed that, with Australian materials and know-how, this great country could produce an affordable and efficient automobile that could be used by its growing population without siphoning off money to the arrogant Americans or genocidal Germans. As such, Blatter established the National Automotive Program, the NAP, to design, engineer, test and mass-produce an all-Australian car to cater to the masses of Australians yearning for a quality vehicle. The controversial plan had its detractors, as Blatter diverted both funding and workers from other government programs to staff and fund the NAP. The defunding of the national electrical grid resulted in rolling blackouts all throughout the summer of 63 to 64, and the lack of staffing in the Civil Aviation Safety Authority was blamed for 4 serious plane crashes over the next 3.5 years, in which a total of 239 Australian lives were lost. Still, the country pressed ahead with what was important, and that was putting a good Aussie car on the road. However, over-bureaucracy took its toll on the project, as did the fact that no Australian university at the time taught mechanical engineering or industrial design. Likewise, as the massive project denuded the Australian steel industry of workers, steel production fell, and as a result, a large proportion of the car's non-load-bearing body panels were fashioned out of sturdy Australian hardwood. The result was a commercial, engineering, and political disaster. The car, which was called the Wallaroo, after a particularly popular Australian marsupial, was woefully slow, extremely unsafe, and eye-wateringly ugly. A British automotive journalist who attended the Wallaroo's launch in late 1966 described it as a terrible travesty of both form and function. He went on to say that the car was rubbish in concept, rubbish in construction, and rubbish in culmination. Simply put, rubbish in every conceivable way. Not only the worst car ever produced, but possibly the worst thing ever produced. Australians, usually loath to agree with a Britisher, conceded that he had a point. Prime Minister Blatter, however, was no longer around to accept the blame, as he had already taken his life by the end of 1965. He became only the second ever Australian Prime Minister to take his life while in office. On December the 3rd, 1965, Blatter sat at the desk of his office in Parliament House, drank half a bottle of rum, swallowed a quantity of sleeping pills, and topped it off with a shotgun blast to the face. Australians, while originally hating the Wallaroo, began, several decades later, to look back at it with a kind of perverse nostalgia, seeing it as a symbol of a country that once was. A country that once thought it possible that Australia could conceivably design and build a half-decent car. This is the origin of the phrase, a Wallaroo wish, referring to an absurdly optimistic or impossibly doomed expectation of success. Thanks, and join me next time for another true story from Australian history. Hooroo.
Oh, a Wallaroo wish.